Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Star Wars The Acolyte Episode 3. So much to talk about from this episode that deepens the lore and mysticism of the Force, while only telling us a part of the story of Brendok Gate. So let's break down this crime scene by scene, for all the Star Wars Easter eggs and clues left on the table for what really went down on that night. We open on Brendok 16 years earlier. A French horn plays. Just the first two notes are John Williams' Force theme, but Acolyte composer Michael Abels, using the French horn for this, just like John Williams did for Luke looking at the binary sunset, sets up this episode's statement about the Force mysticism to come from the same source that George Lucas set it up as in the original films. Yet still, after those first two notes, we veer into this new melody in a new direction, telling us that this episode will still be about the Force, but a completely different take on it. Instead of a binary sunset, this episode, Brendok has a binary moonrise. We glide over this rocky peak that has ruins that remind me of the pillars of the ruins of Tython visited in The Mandalorian Season 2. I think Brendok could be another cosmically significant nexus point that channels Force/thread currents. Tython was tied with the history of the Jedi Order before it became the Jedi Order, and the Jedi believed in the concept of balance from the two moons of Tython, named Ashla and Bogan, and I speculated that Osha's name could be a parallel to Ashla, which went on to become synonymous with the light side of the Force. And you'll notice that Brendok has two moons as well, with a clear importance to their alignment to this coven, moons that form the O in the Acolyte title and certainly parallel the twins of Osha and May. We see a yellow tree unlike those surrounding it, which we learn is a bunta tree. This is the plant that May gave to Chimera to produce the poison last episode. Now the girls end up focusing on the fungus that grows on the bark, which would be a different organism if it's a fungus, but in this case it might just be like an outgrowth or a fruit of the bunta. Either way, it's all connected. Trees are spiritually significant to the Jedi. In Clone Wars, we see Yoda and Anakin meeting in front of the yellow-leafed Uneti tree in the temple courtyard that was tied with the connection to the Force. And when we broke down the Book of Boba Fett, we talked about the importance of the Gaffi tree to the Tusken culture and how it's a rite of passage for them to fashion a weapon from that tree, making their Gaffi sticks, which paralleled the Jedi rite of passage of building a lightsaber. So really the Jedi, the Tuskens, the witches of Brendok, and maybe even the witches of Dathomir and the Sith, these are all different religions with different terms for and approaches for what are essentially the same thing. Osha plays with these flying creatures that are colored a pale blue but with red wings, which are really the same colors of Brendok's moons, but contained within one being. Osha uses the Force, or for her the thread, to freeze it for a moment just to look at it, but then releases it. But then the animal is held again by May in a harder restraint, similar to how May wants her sister to stay, and Osha really just wants this inner caged bird to fly free. May again cruelly grabs this creature and Osha tells her to stop. Seems like May's abilities might be more powerful than Osha's. We learn that Osha doesn't want to participate in the ceremony that they call the Ascension, but May tries to cheer her up.
You're with me, I am with you. Always one, born as two. As above sits the stars, and below lies the sea, I give you you, and you give me.
So this was the rhyme that we heard in episode 1 in Osha's vision of young May, and it turns out that these girls did say it to each other, but in Osha's vision back in episode 1, she only heard the version of young May tell her, I give you you. So before the split, it was mutual, but after the split, only May gives Osha. Mother Coral finds them. She's a female Zabrak with the horns and facial markings. There are two subspecies of Zabraks, the Dathomirians like Mother Talzin and her sons Maul in Savaja Press, and the other one being the Iridinians like Eathkoth. Female Dathomirian Zabraks do not have horns, so Coral must be Iridinian. We see Sol spying on them from behind a tree. He looks with concern, but honestly, I think it's more concerning that the Jedi think that they should have first pick at kids everywhere. Coral brings them back into their fortress, which is carved into a mountain with a half conical shape and a central wedge that's suspended in the middle. While you could say it looks like a dam, I kind of feel like it might have been built into the mountain to harness some geothermal energy from perhaps a volcanic crater that's concealed, perhaps crossed with the gravitational vortex formed by this lunar alignment. We see these two moons, one red, one blue. The blue ring has a blue line extending upward and a bit downward, and that might be the edge of another planetary body that all of these moons orbit. There's also a bright spot at the top of that blue line, which might be another signal point on the rim of that planet. So I'm kind of trying to figure this out. It seems like Brendok might be casting the same shadow on the blue moon that it is on the red moon, and the fact that they're just perfectly aligned like this is why this coven chose this night for the Ascension. Later we see that the red moon is actually closer and will orbit in front front of the blue one when the alignment begins. So as the girls walk through the courtyard, the other coven women bow to them, suggesting that this ascension will give these girls an elevated status within this cult. These girls want spice creams. So covalent spice creams are a thing in Star Wars. A recipe for these ice cream sandwiches shows up in a Galaxy's Edge cookbook. But the thing is, spice in Star Wars is a term for drugs, as George Lucas built this world inspired heavily by Frank Herbert's Dune novel. So are these like sweet LSD? They come in these little flat packets. Maybe the Jedi have a point in getting these kids out of this cult, because this could get Jonestown real quick. Mother Aniseya says that the girls deserve some sweet treats, overruling Coral. You could definitely sense Coral flashing some frustration having to be the bad cop parent. Mother Aniseya tells Coral,
I told you this planet would be safe haven for our coven.
So this tells us that this coven did not originate here on Brendok. They came here from somewhere else where they had been persecuted, making them pilgrims. As Mother Aniseya later says,
The galaxy is not a place that welcomes women like us.
it is similar to what we learned about the witches of Dathomir in Ahsoka, also known as the Night Sisters. This coven was previously on the planet Peridia, but parts of it left Peridia and immigrated to Dathomir. Those Dathomirian Night Sisters were the ones later headed up by Mother Talzin that we saw throughout Clone Wars. And while we thought the Night Sisters were wiped out during the Clone Wars, we learned in Ahsoka that the character of Morgan Elsbeth was a surviving Night Sister during the time of the New Republic. But this group right here are not Night Sisters. The showrunner assured us this in a press roundtable, but said that they were partly inspired by that group, as well as a group called the Path of the Open Hand, which existed during the High Republic era. That was an extremist missionary order that believed no one should use the Force, especially the Jedi. Now, I got the hint from that discussion that Leslie Headland pitched this series in 2018 as an Asajj Ventress spinoff, and it clearly went through several incarnations since then. Specifically, this episode seems like a major world-building departure from anything we've seen before. But a coven of witches, and one of them being a Zabrak, it just kind of seems like at one point Mother Talzin was in the DNA of the development of this group. Coral says to her,
The twins are not normal children.
Now, we learn later about what she means by this, but we do at this point have to wonder about nature versus nurture here. Are May and Osha's moral alignments a result of the Force/thread manipulation of their conception, or the special treatment that they were given within this coven by parents with differing views? Aniseya teaches us a lesson on the thread.
All living things are connected by the same thread. A thread woven through all of existence. Some call it a force and claim to use it. But we know the thread is not a power you wield.
Ah, so the thread is this coven's term for the Force. And with the different term comes a different conceptual understanding of how it works. Is it a push outward or a pull inward? Either way, it is something that binds. We can liken this to Christians calling their higher power God, while the Muslims call this figure Allah. The same concept can have many names and alternate interpretations by different cultures, and each culture can think that their interpretation and their approach is a singularly correct way. Calling it the thread recalls the Great Mothers on Peridia from Ahsoka, who were part of the Witches of Dathomir Coven.
The thread of fate has spoken to us.
The thread of destiny demands it, Grand Admiral.
In their case, the term thread came from the three fates of Greek mythology, who spun, held, and cut the cord or thread of each mortal's destiny. Those Peridia witches' names were Clotho, Atropa, and Lachesis, which were alternate spellings of the names of the Greek fates. This thread is a very different concept. It's not destiny, as Aniseya clarifies later, but rather it's just their word for the living force itself. It's a thread that connects all of us in a tapestry. Mother Aniseya demonstrates this by extending a strand of air between her hands. It's interesting because unlike other depictions of the Force as something seen in nature, or just the impact of it, or perhaps in the form of midichlorians, this thread is something Aniseya can actually show us. Aniseya says,
Pull the thread. Change everything. It ties you to your destiny. It binds you to others.
She echoes the way Obi-Wan describes the Force in A New Hope, and the way Yoda describes it in The Empire Strikes Back.
It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
Its energy surrounds us and binds us.
When George Lucas conceived of the idea of the Force, he was really trying to develop his version of the Voice from Frank Herbert's Dune, but really imbue it with the non-denominational New Age concepts of Chi that were popular in the Bay Area in the 1970s. Lucas got the word of the Force from Arthur Lipsitz's 1963 short film 2187, in which Canadian cinematographer Roman Kreuter said this.
Many people feel that in sort of the contemplation of nature and in communication with other living things, they become aware of some kind of force or something behind this apparent mask, which we see in front of us. And they call it God, or they, depending on their particular disposition.
I appreciate Aniseya's wording of pull the thread, change everything, because the common understanding of to pull a thread would mean to unravel the tapestry, to make a big complicated mess of one's life, which does kind of end up being the case for Osha and May. By pulling this thread, they do unravel a simple life of childhood joys. Mother Aniseya demonstrates how for the thread, the power of one scout repelling her push is not as strong as the power of two scouts with their fingers interlocked. So now we're starting to see why the society really values twins, because their powers are amplified when they're together, but only when they work in harmony. Instead, these girls bicker.
Your enemies will not warn you before they attack.
Whoa, she shoved them onto stone steps. 90-degree corner stone steps. They barely caught themselves from splitting their heads open. Like, we all saw the staircase. Don't tell me the owl did it. I think ultimately this episode is saying whether you're witches or you're Jedi, any cult that teaches kids how to use telekinetic magic to fight amounts to some level of abuse. Osha doesn't want to be a witch, and Mother Aniseya says,
The thread tied you together before you were born.
So once again, we are reminded of the possibility of the Force dyad. This was a concept introduced in The Rise of Skywalker, two beings that are equally connected through the Force, Kylo and Rey, who can teleport objects to each other, communicate across long distances. Twins, Luke and Leia, were also able to communicate through the Force as well, though they have not been firmly categorized as a dyad or anything. It's possible that this show identifies May and Osha as a Force dyad, but might just have a different term for it. Before the ceremony, Osha refuses to share her sketches with May.
But why? Because we're not the same. Of course we are. No, it feels that way because we're the only children here.
That look between the hairdressers. These women know that these girls were conceived through some off-the-books process. So the ceremony begins as the many become one. The witches dance, and one of these witches is the Twilight Grace. Mother Aniseya says that they haven't done this ceremony since their exile.
We were hunted, persecuted, forced into hiding, all because some would consider our power dark, unnatural.
That pause before the word unnatural sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it?
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
Aniseya says,
We were blessed with a miracle, the gift of life.
And she looks at Coral as she says this, because later we learn this.
I carried them.
I created them.
And what happens if the Jedi discover how you created them?
Okay, so let's talk about this. Aniseya and Coral engaged in some kind of sorcery to create life. That is a very big deal. There's all kinds of real world political angles we could get into here. I'm not gonna talk about those, but let's talk about when this might have happened in Star Wars before. The 2018 comic issue Darth Vader number 25 by Charles Soule shows Darth Vader meditating on Mustafar and having a vision that implies that Darth Sidious might have manipulated midichlorians to create Anakin's conception within Shmi's womb. However, Charles Soule and Matt Martin from the Lucasfilm Story Group, who also worked on this comic, have clarified repeatedly that the dark side of the Force is not meant to be a reliable narrator in that vision, and that Palpatine had nothing to do with Anakin's conception. This was just a fear that Vader had. But if this coven unlocked the secret of creating life via the manipulation of midichlorians, then logically this would be the same type of sorcery that could prevent death. All of life in the Star Wars universe comes from the wellspring of life. Those beings and other gods in the Star Wars universe are the only ones who are supposed to be able to create life, and the only ones who are supposed to be masters of death. So either way, I think we're getting closer to what Palpatine said Darth Plagueis the Wise was interested in, bringing us back to this question of this mystery Sith and whether or not it could be Plagueis at a younger age. Plagueis is a Mun race, and I'm not sure if his head would be able to fit in that helmet as we've seen it so far, unless this series is doing what the Obi-Wan Kenobi show did to the Grand Inquisitor's Powan head shape. And based on the Mun lifespan, Plagueis would be a kid at this point in history, but you know, they also vastly stretched out Venestra Rose Mary Allen lifespan for this show, so who knows? Ultimately, I think the mystery Sith is gonna be a new character who was a previously unknown Sith apprentice to Master Tenebrous before Tenebrous found Plagueis, or a previously unknown Sith apprentice to Master Plagueis before Plagueis found Palpatine. But the secret of this sorcery conception is something that this coven likes likely learned from a Sith connection. I don't think this coven is themselves Sith, but I think they made a deal with the Sith. I think the Sith might have offered them protection when they were in exile and pointed Aniseya to this planet of Brendok, when really the plan was to use her and to use Coral in an experiment to produce twins that this Sith could one day recruit. At the end of this video, I'll break down what I think the full plan was. It's not rare anymore to read a news story about some massive data breach or to get an email saying some account of yours has been compromised. And while it's easy to write that off as just the cost of being online, it's just as easy to remove your data using Delete Me. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that helps you reduce the risks of identity theft and scams by removing your data from hundreds of data broker sites. It's super easy to use. You take 5 minutes to submit your info to Delete Me. Their experts comb through the internet looking for places your data should not be, and then they remove it and send you a report in 7 days. Delete Me works all year long to remove things like your name, address, email address, phone number, and more from data broker sites, and they're constantly adding new features and updating their removal target to help you get back control over your personal data. Get 20% off Delete Me US customer plans when you go to joindeleteme.com/rockstars and use promo code ROCKSTARS at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/rockstars and use code ROCKSTARS. Thank you, Delete Me, for sponsoring this portion of the video. So the girls are brought out in this ceremony. This is the same vocalization we heard back in episode 1 when Indara laid eyes on May's forehead marking. As the red and the blue moons align, the witches sing,
The power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
Yeah, you really can't deny the connection in their worship of the power of two and the Sith rule of two, in which there are always two in power at any given time. What I infer from this chant is that through two of them working in tandem, the power of the collective channels through those two. It's similar to how, so long as two Sith live on, all of the Sith live on. And as Palpatine's resurrected form tells Rey in The Rise of Skywalker, he has the power of all the Sith throughout history, and we saw all of those ghosts watching on from the stands. May completes the ascension and gets the spiral symbol on her forehead, a smaller version of the one on Mother Aniseya's head. Having this symbol on her forehead is how Indara later recognizes her when they fight in the noodle bar. Osha hesitantly declares her intent, but Aniseya does not complete the ritual for her because the Jedi have interrupted it by breaking in. The witches draw their bows as Indara, Sol, Kelnaka, and Indara's Padawan Torben enter, all at a younger age. Indara says,
"Forgive our intrusion. We thought this planet was uninhabited."
The all-knowing Jedi were ignorant of their surroundings.
Interesting that among the first words out of Indara's mouths are a complete bold-faced lie, and she's called bullshit on it immediately, because it's clear that the Jedi are absolutely here to investigate this coven. Now, a really interesting detail about the scene, when the Jedi speak, you can see their breath as if the air is cold to them, but when anyone from the coven speaks, you don't really see any breath. It's this cool little effect to show that the coven might be just more acclimated to the colder air or to the very specific temperature of power within this fortress that the Jedi are not acclimated to. Indara says,
"We are concerned that you are training children. The Republic law states..."
Brendok is not a part of the Republic.
Ew. The Jedi are basically saying our state-sanctioned indoctrination that requires these kids to sever all ties to their families is better for the child's welfare than homeschooled indoctrination. Essentially, the Jedi want a full monopoly and exclusive rights to use the Force. Osha steps forward to meet Sol. Now, Indara, you'll notice, has only one dot to the right of her eye, whereas later in her life, she'll have two. It's interesting that no one from Star Wars or Lucasfilm have told us what this means, despite this character supposedly being deceased as of the first episode. Just makes me wonder if there is a duplicitous nature to this character that will be revealed later. Indara asks,
"Where is their father?"
They have no father.
Ooh, we're reminded of Shmi's response to Qui-Gon Jinn in The Phantom Menace when she was asked about Anakin's parentage. Whatever the miracle was that conceived Anakin, it seems like it's going to be the same miracle that conceived these two twins. Sol notes that May's new marking was not there before, and the tensions rise between the groups. He unclips his saber, and Osha notices his belt buckle, the Jedi Order crest. We'll later see that this is what she's been sketching in her notepad. He hands her his lightsaber and tells her that she'd make a great Jedi, which is super dangerous to do to a kid. Don't hand them a weapon like this? What if they look in it the way Luke did? And just telling this girl that she's going to make a great Jedi just feels like a really shady recruiter move, right? She's 8 years old. He's gotta know that she's gonna be way older than all of her peers in the temple. And the Jedi High Council is gonna be like, you're too old, kid. Now you may have noticed that the lightsaber hilts on this series are thicker than we're used to seeing. Thick. On one level, it makes sense that hilts from an era 800 years before the prequels would have different hardware before the technology improved, like, 80s mobile phones compared to smartphones today. Now, the super ancient darksaber is its own thing with a different blade shape even, but actually the real reason is a production issue. Lucasfilm now uses LED tubes for their lightsaber props rather than adding the glows as a visual effect in post-production. They're trying to make things more practical and give real weight to these weapons when they're being held by the actors. But this required bulky battery packs. In Ahsoka, Rosario Dawson had battery packs that were concealed in her sleeves, but in this show, the battery packs are in the hilts, which means they gotta be thicker to contain them. Mother Aniseya puts Torben under a spell. His eyes go black, just as young May's eyes did in Osha's vision in episode 1. This is an interesting power, and isn't it weird that Aniseya told everyone else not to use violence, but in this moment she's like, never mind. I think there is something more going on here. I'll get to it at the end of the video. But Aniseya in this moment releases him because she goes along with the coven being obliged to allow the Jedi to test the girls, perhaps recognizing that denying it will incur Republic oversight. So Elder Jalen suggests to try to get the girls to fail the test. Now, I was interested to learn that this coven uses titles like Mother, Elder, Scout, and Ensign. Ensign is a commissioned officer of the lowest rank within the US Navy in the Coast Guard. It's a rank just below lieutenant. It's interesting to mix a military rank nomenclature within this witch cult, but it suggests that some of them, like the Coral faction, recognize that they have to fight to survive. Ensign Eurus is actually played by Abigail Thorne, actress and playwright who formerly hosted and produced Philosophy Tube on YouTube. Aniseya tells Osha that as she gets older, what she wants will change like the seasons.
In winter we hunt with bunta, in summer with bows and arrows.
But we still hunt.
Seems like Aniseya is missing the point of Osha. She doesn't want to hunt or to kill any creature at all. She likes those little bunta tree fairies. The girls approach the Jedi ship, a Poland 717 Jedi transport. Osha has this moment with Kel Naka, the Wookiee Jedi, as he works on his speeder bike. He's like the cool uncle working on a motorcycle in the driveway. But we're really seeing an early interest from Osha in mechanical work, setting up her future as a mechanic. Torben takes a blood sample to measure Osha's midichlorians, just like Qui-Gon taking a sample of Anakin's blood in Phantom Menace. So even if these girls bombed the test, these Jedi would be able to measure their force sensitivity. You gotta wonder why anyone within the Coven leadership allowed them to go forward with that plan. Indara and Sol run the same tests that Mace Windu in the High Council runs with Anakin in Phantom Menace. Osha says that the first is a spaceship, but it's actually a Lothcat. The second is a droid, but she says it's a mountain, and Sol catches her by saying correct each time.
Correct.
That wasn't
Sol pulls her aside and says that he started when he was 4, and there are thousands of Force-sensitive kids out there, so Osha just needs to have the courage to tell the truth. Osha passes the test and says that she wants to see the galaxy. Again, such an Anakin desire when he was working as Watto's slave on Tatooine. There's so many parallels between these characters. It's almost like Anakin, but they split his warring sides into 2 different people. Now, Mother Aniseya seems to take it well.
Destiny is not decided for you by an anonymous force. If you want to pull the thread, then pull it.
I really am interested in this line because she's basically using semantics to suggest that the Force and the thread are the same thing. She's telling her daughter to pull the thread to join the Jedi, but at the same time, she's telling her not to let the Force dictate her life. It's advice that Osha will continue to apply when she leaves the Jedi Order, but we have to wonder, why is Aniseya suddenly okay with this? You could say that she might just understand that if Osha's heart is not in this coven, it would be destructive to everyone to force her to stay. Maybe she thinks having the Jedi have a recruit with advanced thread training could help reshape the Jedi Order to make them less oppressive. Or maybe there's another reason. Maybe she intentionally wants to drive a wedge between the 2 girls. Osha packs her things, leaving behind 3 plush toys of horse-like animals. Yeah, she's a horse girl. I love it. These might be Steelies. Those are silver-skinned mounts from Elfrana in The Light of the Jedi. Osha has 3 of them, and they all look a bit different, reminding me of like Pokemon evolution. Like we got a Ponyta and a Rapidash. Osha grabs her cool triangular sketchbook where we see she's been sketching the crest of the Jedi Order. Order, and to the right of that might be a lightsaber. But what's weird is she was definitely drawing this in the book before the ceremony. And as far as we know, Osha had never seen a Jedi crest before those four showed up with their belt buckles in the courtyard. So why was she drawing this before she had met any Jedi? Was she seeing this vision in her dreams? Did someone like Sol or Yoda or maybe someone else reach out to Osha through the Force to incept the idea of an alternate path to the thread? May comes in and snaps.
You can't stop me. Yes, I can. How? I'll kill you.
Huh. So May was motivated before by keeping her sister there to amplify her own powers because, power of one versus power of two. But killing her doesn't serve that. So I wonder if Osha had been incepted by Jedi influences, maybe May could be incepted by Sith influences. May might be under someone else's control in this moment. May snatches the sketchbook, she locks Osha in the room, she sets the book on fire, and that somehow leads to a huge fire. What's interesting though is we never actually see May set fire to the entire doorway. Like when we cut out to the hallway, May is just suddenly gone. Similarly, Ben Solo was blamed for burning down Luke's Jedi school, but comics later explained that was a bolt of Sith lightning from Palpatine via Snoke, and that Ben was actually more conflicted in that moment. Osha is able to get out by putting her future mech skills to work to open a hatch in the wall. Meanwhile, fire spreads above. We hear screams. We're really seeing this all from Osha's limited point of view, so we do not know yet what actually was going down in these moments. Also, Sol is just suddenly there? Within minutes of the fire starting? In our roundtable interview, the showrunner promised we would get an episode inspired by Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon, the most famous cinematic example of unreliable narrators and depicting the same crime scene in multiple ways and letting the viewers argue with themselves which one was the actual truth. Headland also promised that episode 5 would be the one everyone will be talking about, and I think that is going to be the episode when we get answers on what really went down here. We know more happened than this episode shows us. Lucasfilm released a promo that shows Kelnaka igniting a lightsaber and leaping toward Torben as his lightsaber is drawn, and in the close-up it kind of looks like Kelnaka's eyes could have been rolled over black before that leap. This is presumably how Torben got that scar over his face from when we saw him on Olega. Seems like there was some kind of battle where Aniseya or maybe some other outside influence could have turned the Jedi against each other. Osha and May are divided by this severed walkway.
Where's Mama? What have you done?
These were the sounds that Osha heard when she was putting out the fire outside the Trade Federation freighter back in episode 1. So May falls, but it's another point of view gap. We do not see where she goes. Sol catches Osha by the hand this time, presumably because he has not yet gotten good at the force catch maneuver. They run past a bunch of dead witches, 15 by our count, and it's not at all clear how they died. I mean, I guess there have been some cave-ins, but like all of them just died? There's no rubble on them. We don't even see Mother Aniseya's corpse in close-up to gauge what wounds she has. Osha just wakes up on the Poland 717 en route to Coruscant. Behind Sol, you can see Indara and Torben with, what's that? A fresh scar down the side of his face. Presumably from Kelnaka, who's not in this scene, but again, I think we're gonna see more on that in episode 5. Sol tells Osha,
They started a fire. It destroyed everything. It killed.
Yeah, Sol does not answer the question explicitly. It's kind of like he's struggling to lie to the girl. He just says that the fire destroyed everything and there's nothing to go back to. This episode ends with May back at the Bunta tree.
Osha.
Even after all this, May thought that she could meet her sister back at the meeting place. To me, this confirms that the May who said, "I'll kill you," was not May, fully in control of her own actions. Someone else was puppeting her in that moment. Also, little detail, none of those flying creatures are buzzing around these yellow leaves anymore. The life and light that Osha brought to this tree is not here for May. So here's my quick theory for what went down. I think Aniseya's coven is a group of witches with their own interpretation from the Force. They call it the Thread. They're not the Night Sisters, they're not the Path of the Open Hand. They're their own thing, and they were persecuted into exile for wanting to use the thread outside the oversight of the Jedi Order. Facing near extinction, Aniseya and Coral were approached by a mystery Sith apprentice who offers to help them to use dark sorcery to conceive twins to give this coven a future, and offers them Brendok as a safe haven without telling them that Brendok was a known Sith base during ancient Jedi-Sith wars. That's what those ruins are. It's a place that channels Sith energy the way Tython channeled the current for the Jedi. The mystery Sith apprentice's true plan was to use one one or both of these twins to take them from this coven at a certain age and to use these kids to overthrow their Sith master, either Master Tenebris or Master Plagueis. Now, 4 Jedi intervened, leading to this coven's massacre, but we'll see. It's possible that one of these 4 Jedi might be revealed as a mystery Sith apprentice. It is possible that Carrie-Anne Moss's shocking death and everyone whining about fruit knives not being able to kill a Jedi could have just been a massive fake out. There could have been a secret operation between Indara and Mother Aniseya, and that their conversation in that courtyard was all a big show. Comment down below with your thoughts. Big thanks to Noah Chen and Brandon Barrick for their help with the research on this breakdown. Follow me at EA Voss. Subscribe to all 3 channels of the New Rockstars Network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.